Hi, I'm Ollie Musson. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm going to do an artist talk about how my work has changed as a queer and disabled performance artist over the pandemic. So I'm a white non-binary person with a pink Mohican and shaved sides of my head. I'm wearing pink lipstick and blue mascara. I'm sat in a room with a light blue wall behind me and lots of different artworks. There's a lino print of a ship, there's a painting of a gemstone, and there's a variety of different works behind me. I'm wearing a black jumper and I'm sat at a desk to give this talk, basically. So yeah, first of all, I guess, let me grab my notes. First of all, I want to kind of talk about how my practice has changed over the pandemic because of how because of the access that I've had to different spaces during that time, but also the access I've had to support and how that has kind of changed my way of being in the world and my way of making work. So, but I first want to acknowledge that obviously the pandemic has been a really, really, really difficult time for a lot of people. Especially for disabled people and especially for those who have been and are still shielding. And so I want to kind of acknowledge that and say that I haven't had to shield. And so maybe some of the positive aspects that have come about for me, I'm aware that won't have come about for everyone. But also to say that I did have a really difficult time and I still am having a very difficult time with the effects of COVID. And so I'm not about putting a positive light on the situation. I think it's very complicated. But the way my practice has changed has kind of been for the better for me. So in that way, it is a positive thing. So I'm gonna share my screen. So now I should be in the top right corner in a little box, and on the main screen is kind of like a paper textured background and some kind of digital fake stickers. And it says Ollie Musson Artist Talk in an oval in the middle on a kind of blue fake sticker background. So I'm going to go on to the next slide. Actually, I'm going ahead of myself. Let's go to the first slide. So first of all, about me is that I'm a multidisciplinary artist with a kind of main focus on performance art. I'm also a drag artist, but I work with lots of other different mediums like film, music, writing, print, zines, and I also do a lot of collaborative work with communities, especially in Reading. And that the focuses on those things have shifted and changed, and that's why I'm kind of talking about that in relation to COVID. But before lockdown, so I came to Reading to do my BA in fine art, and I graduated in 2018. And straight after uni, we set up Double OK, which is a queer and trans arts collective, and we did that to basically survive, to give us space to perform, to give us space to form community, because Reading for those of you who don't know where Reading is, it's like a half an hour train from Paddington in London, but it's a bit of a commuter town, and there's not kind of much of a queer scene, or it's a bit of a difficult space to navigate because a lot of people will go to London. And at the time when we graduated, I didn't have any money, but also my health was kind of coming to a head after graduating, and that putting a lot of pressure on me. And I wasn't able to go to London. I wasn't able to afford the travel. I wasn't able to kind of handle the stress of getting on a train and going through the underground. And we wanted something that was a lot easier to physically get to, and something that was, that felt like our community, that was within our local environment. And I think sometimes going into London as an outsider into those spaces can feel a bit isolating because you're not living that life in that space. And Reading's a very different space. So we kind of started up this collective to kind of build this community and give ourselves a space to make work and perform and exist. And we did this by running queer performance nights. So we worked with local artists, we performed in them, we worked with local venues, we worked with a nightclub called After Dark, which is now not functioning as a nightclub anymore, and I think it is closed. And that happened during the pandemic. So yes, we were kind of we didn't have any money for what we were doing, but also personally. And it was very much kind of out of survival. And so the work I was making at the time was about my health. It was about I made some pieces about the recurring tonsillitis that I had. My BA piece was about chronic indigestion, and kind of my work was exploring health and gender before I even really knew that it was. So I think what's interesting about that is that even though I was talking about these things, these barriers, access needs, experiences of chronic illness and disability, I wasn't really necessarily aware of it, that's what I was doing. And I also wasn't approaching it in a kind of way that reflected my health. So I was pushing myself quite hard to run these events and do these physical performances, and I felt a great pressure to be earning money, even though I was signed off long-term sick from working. I still felt a lot of pressure to be back into work very quickly. I also didn't have any kind of disability benefits. So I was just on the basic universal credit because I was told that I actually couldn't get any other help, which was not true. I didn't know this for a long time. So I ended up I did end up going to work on a makeup counter for a bit. And that was just before the pandemic hit. I'd been signed off sick again from work. So that's kind of the context of leading up to COVID. And then so it was difficult to manage the events with no money and no kind of support, and not much personal stability. And then in December 2019, after a really busy year of running events, we like decided to take a break, basically. So it was through, you know, December 2019. So we went into lockdown in March. And at that point, I couldn't leave the house. I wasn't working. I essentially put myself into a self-imposed lockdown because I was like, I can't carry on how I am. And I couldn't, yeah, we couldn't carry on the events, but also I couldn't function in my life how I was. So when it got to March and the lockdown, it was kind of, I was already in that place. So I've realised I've just chatted away and I didn't go into the next slide. So I'm going to talk about, just go over these pieces of work a little bit. So this is, so on the screen is a photo of me on the left-hand side. I'm lit up in kind of purple lighting and I'm on a stage and there's a microphone that I'm holding and I'm reading off my phone. I'm wearing a tie-dye Star Wars t-shirt and I can't remember what this hat's called, but one of those, I don't know, one of those smaller hats that's not like a full beanie. So yeah, this was before COVID, and it was an event called Before You Go Home at Oakford Social Club in Reading, and we actually got some money for this, which was our first funded gig. And this was in, I think it was either October or November 2019. And this was the last thing I did, the last event I did before kind of I was like, I need to shut myself away for a bit. We did bring in an artist, Clay Bowler, from some of the funding that we got, so he was able to travel down and perform with us, which was really exciting. But it was quite a stressful event. The venue kind of wasn't set up how we needed it, and we were working with kind of external people who maybe didn't know what our needs were. So it was a bit of a weird one, but we did some poetry and sound pieces that were really beautiful. So next slide. This is a picture again on the left of me performing. So it's kind of a shadowy figure of me in drag laid on the floor holding a microphone, and in the background is a projection of an image of the back of my throat, and there are drawings on the wall of the back of my throat, and there's kind of a pink lighting to light it up. So again, this was before COVID, and this was in November 2018, so it was quite soon after I'd graduated. And the piece was called Tonsillitis Sucks, and it was made at a residency at WAMP in Sheffield. So again, like I said earlier, I was kind of making work about health, my experience of health, chronic illness, which I didn't have a name for at the time, or didn't feel like I could position myself like that, and how that kind of intersected with gender on my body. And again, the residency in WAMP was like an incredible experience for me. Sheffield's my hometown, so even I live in Reading, but I have such a big connection to Sheffield, so it was really important for me to be able to go work in that space and work with the people from WAMP, and create this piece. And I had, it was like a very, very rich time for my practice, and I'd never been paid to do a residency before. So there were all these really good things that came out of it. But I would also say that, again, because I wasn't used to kind of, I wasn't viewing myself as a disabled person at that time. I didn't know a lot about kind of my chronic illness and my mental health. I didn't, so I wasn't in a position to kind of understand what my access needs were for this residency. So in a lot of ways, I overworked myself, I overpushed myself. And I think if I was to do it now, it would be a completely different situation, and I would know how to frame what I needed a lot more. So again, the ways I was working were not necessarily kind of reflective of what I was talking about, or I was pushing myself to be kind of productive or work within this kind of, you know, neurotypical capitalist way. So yeah, we'll go to the next slide. Oh, I think it's been a bit slow. Gone through too many now. So the next slide, so the image on the left is, it's an installation that I did at Garage Gallery in Reading. So there is, again, a projection on the wall of me in drag. So it's close up on my face, and I've got a blonde wig on and red lips. Then towards the bottom, it's quite a dark image because it's in a dark room. Towards the bottom is a cardboard cut out of a mouth. And then hanging in front of the projection, so casting shadows, as well as the objects themselves, are these sculptures that I made, which are made out of chicken wire, and then they've got a mixture of flour and water that has dried on it, so kind of covering the holes. So this piece was called Gargle It, and this was literally showing in March 2020, so it was just before the lockdown, and it was also in what is now where I live, the garage of the house that I live in with my partner, and they had set up a kind of a gallery space within their garage because there aren't really any galleries in Reading. So again, it was kind of working locally and working within an installation setting. But again, we kind of had this open for like a couple of weeks, and it put a lot of pressure on us to be there physically, and especially with the kind of growing anxiety of COVID. Even though, again, this was an incredible experience to have, and I got so much out of it in terms of my practice, in terms of like the kind of physical demanding side of it, it was quite difficult. So basically through COVID, my practice shifted in reaction to the pandemic and my disabilities. So we started through Double OK. We did a couple of digital events online, which a lot of people were doing at the time. So the slide we're on now has the poster. So it's like a digital pixelated image, excuse me, of some trees in the background, and then there's kind of a blurred purple hand reaching over the top, and it says digital in a kind of, it almost like a wavy thumbprint pattern. In the bottom left in pink it says you slip into, and underneath that it says the date, which is the 22nd of May 2020, 8 p.m. BST, and twitch.tv/OK. So we did this on Twitch. And in the top right hand corner is our OK logo. So this event, was during COVID, and we had 16 different artists show work in this. Some of it was live streamed, a lot of it was pre-recorded, and they were all queer artists from around the UK. This was the most amount of artists we'd ever worked with in a show, and it was the furthest kind of reach we'd ever had. So the audience, but also the performers, are all across the UK. And it was very exciting for us to reach that kind of community and connect with people outside of Reading, and as well as people in Reading. And it really changed kind of the scope of what we could do. And we could see our work had been so focused on providing space for people in Reading, and actually we'd provided spaces for people in all kinds of places that might even have more of a queer scene, but needed this kind of space to come together. So it helped us to kind of see what the scope of our work was. And we did another event online, which we actually got some funding from the Rising Sun Arts Centre, which is in Reading. And we were able to pay ourselves and some other artists, Luca, who was from Rotterdam, and Valeria, who was in London. And so again, we were connecting way further than we had before. This was like the most we'd ever had money-wise to put on an event. And we also spent some of that money on an access course, access training with Quiplash. So I know at the time everyone was obviously talking quite a lot about accessibility, but I guess it came and we were too. We kind of realized that we needed to refocus on this, but it came from a personal perspective of, oh wow, we can access so much more now, and we want to provide that for other people. Because at the time there were a lot of drag shows being streamed online, and for me and my partner, we both, struggled to go to London. So we saw so many drag shows that we would never ever have been able to see, and it was really inspiring. And like just to see that kind of underground level of drag in such an accessible, easy way, especially when we were also watching RuPaul's Drag Race at the same time, and we were comparing the two, obviously both made for screens at this stage, and seeing the underground drag was like way better, and it made us realize that we wanted to do that, we wanted to be a part of that, and we wanted to be able to access that. So that was kind of where we started coming from in terms of that. And so we did these online events, and that's how we kind of adapted, but it was difficult. It was an adjustment. I had to learn how to live stream. I had to teach myself to do that. We were communicating between Reading and Glasgow at the time, and there was a lot more screen time, obviously, and a lot more kind of Zoom calls. But the pressure on my body and in terms of organising things from home, like it was so much less than it was doing physical events. And I really noticed that I was able to do more and provide more care for the artists and the people I was working with, because I wasn't pushing myself so much to a limit. So on the other side of this is kind of what was going on personally for me. And in terms of the pandemic, the kind of social acceptance of not going outside was a massive thing for me, because I'd gone into this kind of self-imposed, like in October, November, December, I was like, I can't go outside. I can't, I can't leave the house. And then it got to March, and we were being told you're not allowed to. Oh, and that became the norm. And it's quite lucky for me, really, that that happened, because it absolutely changed the level of pressure I was putting myself under to be able to do those things, to be able to go outside, to be able to work a job, to be able to physically go out and attend things, to not, to not give myself the chance to rest or settle into the house I just moved into. It gave me time to really work on the kind of structure of my life, to really slow down in a way that I've never ever had the chance to do before. And having a stable housing situation also made that be able to happen, which again, I was very lucky that I managed to get that just before the pandemic, because my previous housing was not stable or safe at all. So again, I recognize kind of the privilege in that situation, but also this kind of permission that we were given by the rest of the world to take a break was something that was really liberating. And this gave me the time to access therapy, which is something that I was trying to do before the pandemic, but was really struggling to actually go and physically attend. So when the sessions moved online, that was actually a lot easier for me. It gave me the time and the mental space to access hormones, and to start fundraising for top surgery, to decide that I wanted top surgery. It also gave me the time to apply for PIP, personal independence payment, and sort out my receiving the right benefits for my limited capacity for work through universal credit. So again, all of these kind of financial support that I have now, I didn't have when we first went into lockdown, and I wouldn't have had the time or the headspace to kind of pursue those things if it hadn't have been lockdown. And so now it means that now I have the support that I need. And this has obviously massively impacted the work I make, the way I make it, and the spaces and the communities that I want to continue to access and create once when things started opening up. So it was a really big moment for me to be like, okay, I'm a disabled person. I also need this help. I need this support, and I should have been having it for the last few years, and I wasn't having it. And also to reassess my boundaries, to reassess the way I want to approach my art practice, to reassess the pace I want to take my life. And so it was really over this time that I was able to kind of feel part of a disabled community, and also to connect with a wider queer community as well. So it was a massive, massive shift in the way I was able to kind of approach my life. So going back to the work, on the slide at the minute is it's a picture of a lino print on the left hand side of my torso. So it's kind of like scratchy lines, and it's a bit messy, and there's kind of like those kind of diamond sparkle emojis over covering the chest, and it's in black ink with a white background. So during the time where I was not able to leave the house, and then through COVID, I started making lino prints and mono prints, and this for me was the first time I'd ever really had a material practice, and I really enjoyed doing it for me, not having the pressure of kind of what it was doing or saying, where it was going, and I would just spend hours and hours and hours just making these lino prints and mono prints, and a lot of it was kind of making Christmas cards for people and ways to connect with people during the pandemic. And this is something now that I feel has really been brought into my practice, is this kind of material printmaking, and an approach to more of like a visual image-based way of working, which I wasn't really focusing on before. It's a slower process to do a printing than it is to do a performance. Obviously there can be a lot of work that goes into a performance, but for me the kind of the gratitude, the outcome of that is in the moment. It's that moment when you're performing. But for lino print, there's more of a process to it, and there's kind of ups and downs of like, oh, I really like this bit, or this bit's a bit more difficult, and it's a lot more time based. So I think that helped me to think about the way I can break down the way that I work and slow it down and enjoy the process of it more, rather than kind of churning things out. So I've gone on to the next slide now, and there's another lino print, which is kind of a graphic-y image of the inside of my throat. So there's, you can see the lips, the teeth, and then the tonsils at the back and the tongue. And it's in this really nice kind of color palette of a dark green with this kind of neon green coming through in a textured way that you can kind of see the texture of the paper. So again, like, I had a lot of time to experiment, and I also had the space in the house that I was living in, which I hadn't had before. So yeah, this was kind of starting to develop. I also, on the digital events we did, I made a video of me putting on makeup and talking about my relationship with makeup. This again was something that I'd always used when I wasn't able to go out or leave the house or make work in the way that I was making. And I, a lot of the time during the pandemic was me spending hours doing my makeup. So my work was kind of, that piece was quite confessional. It was quite intimate, and it was a way that maybe I had shied away from working before. I felt I had to be a lot more performative and a lot more, I mean, my work was always direct, but it didn't have that kind of maybe intimacy, like the way that video did, because I'd recorded the voiceover on my phone whilst laying in bed, and I was kind of talking really gently to myself. So I think that was quite a scary piece to make, but looking back again, that was kind of a big change in the way that I worked, because it was this film which I wasn't, I was used to performing live in front of an audience, and it felt very weird to make a film and show that. Again, the kind of way that you make a film is very different from the liveness of performing, and it slowed it down for me in a way. And instead of having that pressure on the moment to perform, it was done beforehand, and then you could you know I always say, like, with a painter, you do all the work leading up, and then when it gets to installation of the exhibition, you can put it on the wall, and it's done. But with a performance, like, the work happens then. And so it was kind of one of my first experiences of just being able to show the work and enjoy the time that it was shown, and not have to be stressed about performing or worrying that I wasn't well enough to perform. So next slide is one of a more recent piece of work that I did. So it's a photo of my very close-up photo of my body in the bath, and then there's digitally drawn on text on top of it in a bright green, outlined in black, and it says, "I was too sick to make the work I wanted, so I made this instead." And I guess now I'm refocusing a lot on the processes of making, how I can reflect the way that I work within the politics of the work that I make, how I can take care of myself, even though I love performance and I enjoy it so much, how I can pace myself in a way that's manageable. And so making kind of more digital work is more accessible in a lot of ways, making things quickly, and making them honestly as well. And that's where I'm kind of at this point. I'm just going to go into the next slide. Computers being slow. So we're on the next slide, and on the left is a photo of me lit up in pink. I'm kind of like, I don't know what the word, grimacing. I've got my mouth open. I'm kind of like fiercely, almost like shouting. I'm mid lip sync, and I've got my hand on my butt. I'm wearing a pink jumpsuit and flame glasses, and I'm in drag. And this was at a drag event that I did in December in 2021. So I started running drag nights at the Rising Sun Art Centre in Reading when things started to open up more. And this was because I needed the kind of accessibility of a local drag night, which we don't have in Reading. And I wanted to bring together a community of drag artists that I knew existed, but we had nowhere to perform. So I've done 2 of those nights now, and I'm working towards a 3rd in April. And these events have been like, very kind of very inspiring, very radical in the way that I've tried to approach them. I've tried to space them out more and just have fun in the way that I perform, and not kind of put pressure on myself to have like an artistic framework, or kind of the things that we get told to look at within university. It was like, okay, this space is for community, and it's for drag, and it's for gender euphoria. And so taking kind of those pressures off it and focusing on this kind of cultivating of community in the local area was where I kind of decided to take the work that I'm doing. I'm continuing to make prints, digital images, and I'm really interested in zine making. I've gained like a massive collection of zines, and I think that's something that I really want to take my practice into that area, because I feel like that is a way of connecting across communities of people who can't get to physical events. So even though this kind of journey has led me back to physical in-person events, I'm really trying to look at ways of recording these nights, having access to them online. And that is a slow process with not kind of much support or money, but that's the way I kind of want to take my practice on further, is how to do a blended model of kind of online and in-person events, and to work within community spaces, work within the local area, and create spaces that just don't exist. So that's the end of my talk. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. So now you should be back to just a full screen of me. Thank you so much for listening. This talk has been quite a difficult thing for me to do, but it felt really important to be able to do it. And I thank Disability Arts for giving me this opportunity to kind of claim space as a queer, non-binary, disabled person. So thank you, and yeah, bye.